Welcome everyone to the CSO Chat for Monday, June 10th. The topic today is the National Service Criminal History Check Process, or the NSCHC. Today we're going to be reviewing the NSCHC. This session will be interactive, so for those of you who've joined us today, I hope you can chat in the participant kind of the conversation box on the webinar, or join us via your phone, because I will be looking for some interactive pieces today. Excuse me. My name is Jancy LaFollette. I work with the Corporation for National and Community Service Iowa State Office, and I'll be your presenter/facilitator for today's call. The PowerPoint will be available after the call, and today's session is being recorded. So if you object, you may disconnect now. Our CSO chats are designed to highlight a topic and provide a forum for discussion. They are not intended to be all-encompassing, so please make sure that you review the additional resources available to you on this topic. These are really just to raise awareness and to kind of have a platform for folks to ask questions about particular topics. So these are not designed to be all-encompassing. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping items. Please make sure that your phones are on mute. So all of our lines are currently open, so you can chat at will. Please place your phones on mute if you are not talking, so we don't hear background noise or typing in the background. If you do not have a mute button on your phone, so you joined us via your phone today, but you do not have a mute button, *6 should mute and unmute your line. So *6 will mute and unmute your telephone line. Please do not place us on hold. So if you need to jump off for a second, please don't place us on hold. We will likely hear your hold music, and while it is beautiful, it can be distracting. In addition, if you joined us via your computer today, and you're hearing me through your computer speakers, there is a radial button at the bottom of your screen. It looks like a microphone. If you click on that, that will mute your line. If you click on it again, it will unmute your line. So we just want to make sure that folks are aware to mute their lines. If you've joined us via the webinar and your phone today, sometimes those two can reverberate off of each other. So make sure that you're muting one of those lines before you talk. That's a known issue that we have if folks join via both mechanics. We will have time at the end for questions today. However, this will be an interactive session, so feel free to use the chat functionality or the conversation box on the webinar through the LinkedIn system to ask questions as we kind of move through today. So hope everyone can hear me okay. If you can't, please let me know. So I'll pause for just a second. If anyone's having any issues hearing, let me know, okay? All right, hearing none. So the agenda for today is pretty simple. We have an hour for these CSO chats. We do them quarterly, every other month. I guess not quarterly, every other month is when we do them. And so today's agenda is really just a review of the National Service Criminal History Check. We're going to talk about the website that the corporation has out there and some of the resources available to you on that website, making sure that people are aware of those. We're going to talk about the check components, and so what those consist of, and some common issues that we found along the way. And then, of course, have a time at the end for questions and answers if you guys have any questions. So just a reminder, this is a basic overview. So this is not intended to be all-encompassing. Make sure you're utilizing the website for more detailed information. If you do have specific questions that you want to talk to your program officer about, please make sure that you schedule in a time with them. Right now it's really busy for us. Summers are always crazy for the state office, but if you guys do have any questions about your NSCHC processes or procedures or your background checks, please let us know. And we are happy to set up some times to discuss that with you. So again, just make sure that your phones are on mute today as we move through today. So as we begin, we're going to review the NSCHC, or the National Service Criminal History Check process. So under the National and Community Service Act of 1990, as amended by the Serve America Act, all grantees must conduct a National Service Criminal History Check on participants and program employees in AmeriCorps, Foster Grandparent, Senior Companion, MLK, 9/11, Volunteer Generation Fund, Social Innovation Fund, and any other programs funded by the Corporation for National and Community Service that we have. All employees, participants, and others who receive salaries, National Service Education Awards, living allowances, or stipends Under the corporation grants, even if those activities do not involve service with vulnerable populations, must conduct a check prior to beginning employment or service. RSVP and VISTA programs are required to conduct criminal history checks on all employees who receive part or all of their salary from the respective program grant. According to our statutory requirements, which I'm not going to list off here, as well as our terms and conditions of the grants, a grantee and subgrantee's inability to demonstrate that you conduct any aspect of the required criminal history check will likely result in a cost disallowance. So that's a lot of mumbo jumbo to basically say, if you have a grant with CNCS, and all of you on the phone are senior corps grantees with Iowa, if your program uses those grants to pay stipends for your volunteers, so that's specifically for senior companions and foster grandparents, and uses those funds to pay for employees, so that means the program directors and any other staff that are paid out of the grant, you must conduct an NSCHC, or a National Service Criminal History Check, on those persons. If you do not successfully complete those checks, disallowance of cost is basically likely to occur. What disallowance of cost is basically mean you paying back CNCS funds. So if you do these incorrectly, that's basically a disallowance of cost. There's no opportunity to correct them and get that disallowance taken away. Basically, if they're done incorrectly, you have to correct them, but then we also have to do disallowance of cost. So that is why this is a very, very, very important process to go through, and I want to make sure that people are paying attention to it. This was all the talk a couple years ago, and it's kind of died down a little bit since then, but as we're doing compliance monitoring, we're seeing that people are still not doing this correctly, and sponsors are still not understanding why this is important. And so we want to make sure that folks understand that the NSCHC, or the National Service Criminal History Check process, is important to you as grantees, because disallowance of cost will occur if these are done inappropriately. So any questions about that before we get started as to why we're covering this today? One of the things that our previous CEO talked about was having the checks done on time every time. That's a big thing with us, is checks are run, but they're not run correctly, or they're not run on time. And so when they talk about NSCHC, they really talk about having checks done on time every time. So always correct, always doing what we need to be doing. So any questions about that? Kind of why this is important and why we're covering it today. Okay, for those of you who have joined us via the webinar, I want you to give me a little emoji. So that can be a thumbs up, a raising of your hand, a smiley face, a moon walking guy. If you have checked out the nationalservice.gov criminal history check resource page. Who has already checked this out and is very familiar with this website? A raise of hands on the webinar. As I said, we're going to try to make this as interactive as possible from afar. There you go, Sonia. Thanks for the high five. I think that's a high five. Kathy. Molly does not look, her emoji is not excited. So it looks like folks have checked this out. So this is a key resource for you guys. This nationalservice.gov/resources/criminal history check. This is kind of where everything is at for questions about the National Service criminal history check. So give me a second, and I am actually going to present my desktop to you. And so I want to make sure that folks are seeing what I am seeing. So hold on one second. It's going to transition over, and you should be seeing, maybe at some point, my desktop. And so I kind of want to roll through what this looks like. so you guys can see it kind of firsthand and making sure that folks know where resources are. If you guys have heard me present before, I'm a big believer and I don't have to know everything. I just have to know where to find everything when I need to reference it again. And so that's what I want to make sure that you guys are well equipped to do. As I said, this session today is really just a broad stroke of the NSCHC and not really diving into too much detail today, but just making sure you guys understand that this is important. The NSCHC does have a required annual training. So this is an annual training that is required for our programs every year. And so I want to make sure that folks are aware of that. Oh, it looks like it's showing you my dual screens. I'm sorry about that, but we'll hopefully you guys can see popping up is the NSCHC criminal history check resources. So are folks seeing that? Okay. Yes? All right, good. Please excuse the other screen. That's my dual screens. For some reason, it's decided to give you both of them. So on here, on the resource page, it kind of talks about what it is and what are the requirements. And so if you guys haven't been on here in the last couple, I think the last year or two, they've actually put these little diagrams in here that have honestly, for me, immensely helped. I'm a visual person. Before it was this long list of stuff and got very confusing. And so on here now, you'll see the very first thing is the required online training. This again is a requirement for you guys to do. If you did it last April, it was due this April. If you did it last July, it's due this July. So this is a requirement. You guys need to keep the training on file. So when we come and do compliance monitoring, or if CNCS asks for it at any point, because you know we do that sometimes, you need to be able to have documentation that you have taken these trainings annually. So that can be found here. It actually takes you off of this website to a different place. But I just want to make sure that folks are aware of that. In addition, we have some video trainings here, the regulations if you wanted to get into those, and then policies and procedures and guidance. So these are kind of the big four if you're looking for kind of what's covered and all those fun things and a lot more information. The next thing you're going to see is the check components. So the NSOPW, which is the National Sex Offender Public Website. That is what that stands for. The state checks and the FBI checks. And so to learn more about those three checks, you would click on each one. I'm going to click on the NSOPW. And it's actually going to take you to its own website. And here you're going to see NSOPW guidance, the Department of Justice, the DOJ National Sex Offender Public website. So it actually takes you to the website. And so those are things that you're going to you can check out. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on any one of these because we're going to cover the components in a second. But I just wanted to make sure that folks were aware of what's on here. In addition, you're going to see checklist, effective dates, vendor guidance, alternative search procedures, exemptions, pre-approved alternative search procedures, enforcement guides, self-certification, the 2014 assessment period, training calls and presentations. All of this information is on here. If you're like me and you're like, where in the heck do I start? I would start with checklist. I'm a big checklist person. That's just me. That's who I am. But if you go to the checklist bullet point, I don't know what that is exactly, that checklist little thing, you're going to see a list pull up. And the component assessment is an assessment that you can do, the procedures review. So each of you have procedures and policies. The documentation checklist is the one that I encourage folks to have in your file. So I'm actually going to pull that one up for a second. And this one is the one that really kind of walks you through. It gives you the name of the individual in the covered position. Do they have access to vulnerable populations? Yes or no. Their start date, verification of their photo their government issued ID, their written consent. So it kind of walks you through everything that's needed in their file. And here is also where you can record the state of service check, the state of residence check. You know, those are two different things. And when the source of those, when the initiation process started, the date initiated, the date completed. So this is just a nice checklist for you to keep everything. This is something that I do encourage folks to have in their file if they haven't gone through their files in a while, or if they're starting new files for folks. It's just a nice checklist to have. In addition, one of the things that's a requirement of the process is that you have reviewed and considered the results of the check, and you need to sign off on that. Well, this provides that sign off date and signature and the name and title. So this form has been updated. It was last updated last July. So if you haven't seen this since 2014, this is new. This little consideration of results piece is new. They added last year. And then down, as you scroll down, it gives some guidance and supporting documentation for you. So you can kind of walk through that a little bit. This is one of those things that if you're not sure where to start, this is where I would recommend folks starting, is that documentation checklist. It's just kind of a nice, for me, one-stop shop for everything. It also could be because I've dealt with the NSCHC for a while now, so it can get a little overwhelming and confusing. But I just wanted to make sure that folks understood where that is and what that was. And so there's other pieces on here, but feel free to check those out. I'm going to pause for 1 second and pull back up our Skype to see if folks have questions on here. Just making sure that I'm reading my chat functionality here. I can't read it when I'm showing you my screen. So it looks like everyone has checked out the website and is familiar with it, so that's fantastic. It's a great resource for folks to keep up abreast to of what's going on and what's happening. So just making sure that folks are aware of that. One of the things that I found interesting on here, if you go to the state check, for instance, so we talked about the different components. On here it says the state-by-state criminal history guide, and it actually will walk you through kind of how the states are all different. If you guys remember when this first rolled out, some states use vendors, some states use the designated clearinghouse, which is what Iowa has. So every state's a little different, and so if you're ever confused or want to reference back, they've tried really hard to put the state-by-state criminal history check guidance in here, and they're always looking to update that. So if there's any discrepancies that you see, please let us know. But I wanted to make sure that folks were aware of that. So this is under the state check when it looked at the three components: the NSOPW, the state check, and the FBI check. That's where you're going to see the state-by-state criminal history check guide. And then you'll roll down and you'll click on Iowa, and then it'll take you kind of to some more Iowa-specific guidance. Then you'll see overall. So we just wanted to make sure that folks were aware of that. These were a few things that, if you haven't checked it out for a while, have been updated. And so I just wanted to make sure that folks are aware of what's out there. So any questions about the website and kind of what's out here? What's available to you, what resources are available to you. The video and training library is great. The required annual training, again, we encourage at least 2 people from your organization to take that to be well informed about what's required of the grant when it comes to the NSCHC. So any questions about this? The lines are open. Molly asked.
Nancy, this is...
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Kaylin, is that you? Kayla?
Yeah, sorry, you could have went with Molly first. So I know you guys encourage 2 people to do it.
Yes.
I, as the RSVP director, actually don't run the background checks. Either our coordinator does, or if it's paid staff, then my supervisor is the one that runs it. But my position as director is required to have background check training, right?
Yes. Yeah, we want you to go through that, yes.
And then I figure I have both of them, since they're the ones actually doing it, do the training also.
Yes. That is.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. That's a great question. Yeah, so we do want, even though if you, for specifically RSVP, if you guys don't actually run those checks, we still want you guys to be well informed about what consists of running those checks. So so you're aware of what it takes if someone ever has questions. So I do encourage you guys to do that. But yes, we do want you to take that. I don't want to say encourage. You should be taking that training. I guess encourage might be too light of a word there. So yes, take the training. Molly has a question. If we take the checklist and create our own, is that okay? Molly, you most certainly can adapt those checklists as you need. Just keeping in mind that those are some of the requirements that are out there for the program. But if you add more to it, you most certainly can do that and adapt those to your own. That's definitely okay. Those are not an official checklist that has to be in every file. That's just the checklist that we've created to help people, and so you can most certainly adapt those as needed. Just keeping in mind that those are the key components of that. Would you be willing to look over a checklist I create? Yes, Molly. Not to this week, but yes, I could definitely look over a checklist and be happy to look over that for you. Not a problem. Any other questions about the website or what we've talked about so far? I see someone typing, so I will hold off until that one comes through. And if you guys do have specific questions about your forms or your checklist, definitely set up a conversation with myself or Vicki. I'm not everyone's designated program officer, so Vicki does have half of you and I have half of you. So let us know if there's any specific questions that you have. So Kaylin has a question in regards to, can you clarify state of service versus state of residence check? Do we do one or the other? So the difference between state of service and state of residence, so at the time of application, if someone is applying to your program, and this is really more applicable a lot of times for AmeriCorps programs than necessarily for Senior Corps programs, but it does still sometimes happen in Senior Corps. If someone's applying to your program at the time of application, they do not reside in Iowa. So they reside in Illinois, they reside in Wisconsin, they reside in Florida, they're moving here. You have to do a state of service check, so where they're going to be serving, and you have to do a state of residence check, where they were residing at the time of application. So you have to do both if they are not residing in the state of Iowa. So if they're residing, they apply in Iowa, they're from Iowa, they apply here, you just have to do the state of service check, which just means you just have to do an Iowa check. If they apply, however, they're currently living in Florida, but they're moving here, then you have to do a state of service, which is Iowa, and a state of residence, which is Florida. So depending on where they are residing at the time of application, based on if you do a state of service or a state of service and a state of residence. So the state of service is always due, but the state of residence is basically if they're residing somewhere else besides Iowa at their time of application, you have to do a state check in that state. Does that make sense? That sounded way more confusing than it needed to be. Hopefully that didn't overwhelm you, Kaylin. Sorry. Okay, any other questions? There's a lot of little nuances with this, so I want to make sure that folks are aware. So here is where we get into the check component. So NSOPW, National Sex Offender Public Website Check. Who receives this check? You can type it in to the chat functionality. Again, I'm trying to make this interactive. You guys aren't sitting in front of me. I know that's really hard to do, but who receives this check? Who receives the NSOPW check? So I'm seeing a few things come in. Molly says everyone, all RSVP staff. Kathy Barloon says everyone. Sheila says everyone. I see Sonia's typing. Kaylin Peterson says same. So yes, the NSOPW, if you are receiving basically anyone who is charging time to the grant or is a program recipient, meaning they receive a stipend or an education award from the grant from CNCS, have to do NSOPW. So everyone does an NSOPW, National Sex Offender Public Website. That has to be checked for everybody. When is this check completed? Who knows when this check needs to be completed? Kaylin says before they start work. I'm seeing few more people, 2 or more people are typing currently. Before the offer is extended to the candidate, immediately after they have accepted the position. So the NSOPW needs to be completed prior to the start of work or service. So NSOPW, Newton RSVP, yes, before their first day. So NSOPW needs to be completed prior to their start of work or service. So this is one that has to be done prior to their start of work or service. So if you, like Sheila says, we've given them the offer, they have accepted it, they run the NSOPW immediately. That could be their policy and their policies and procedures that they do. In Dubuque, it says before an offer is extended to the candidate. So basically, before they actually ever extend an offer to that candidate, they run an NSOPW. It's before they start work or service, and when it's actually ran, as long as it's before they start work or service, kind of where it is in that, like Sheila, as soon as they accept, Dubuque, before it's extended, those are part of your policies and procedures. So making sure that you're following those is key to this as well. But our criteria is that they have to be completed. And completed, I mean ran, making sure there's no hits, making sure they've been signed off on prior to their start of work or service. So very good. Everyone did great. So the state check. Who receives the state check? Same questions for each one of them. And the lines are open, so if anybody wants to chime in on the phone, they most certainly can.
Nancy?
Yes.
Sorry, I got a phone call. Is your question who receives the state check?
Yes, who receives the state checks?
Everyone.
Very good. So Kaylin writes, same as the NSOPW. So yes, the state checks are basically anyone who is charging time to the grant receives a stipend or an education award from the grant receives a state check. So the NSOPW and the state check are, everyone receives those. So everyone gets an NSOPW, everyone gets a state check. Those are the 2 components of the NSCHC that are applicable to everyone. So when do the state checks, when is the state check needs to be initiated? And this does differ from the NSOPW according to our regulations. However, based on your policies, it might be the same as the NSOPW. However, based on the NSCHC, when is the state check needing to be initiated? I have a few people typing. Rosemary says the first day of work. I see Sheila's typing. So the state check needs to be initiated no later than the first day of work or service. So the state check is a little different from the NSOPW, where the NSOPW needs to be completed and cleared prior to the first day of work or service. The state check needs to be initiated no later than the first day of work. Sheila says, if done before hiring and something found, consequently not offered position, the applicant could come back and challenge findings for reasons not to hire. And Sheila, you are correct. Absolutely. Everyone does this one. Some people initiate it on the first day of work. Some people initiate it, which is a best practice, to initiate it prior to them ever coming on board. So, that's great, but the bare requirement is that they have to be initiated on no later than their first day of work or service. And by initiated, what do I mean? When I say they have to be initiated, what does that mean? Oh, Sheila, you were referring to the NSOPW. Sorry about that.
one step beyond consent.
What was that, Molly?
One step beyond consent.
One step beyond consent. Very good. Have you studied the NSCHC policy?
I
Yes. So basically, according to our definition, the check, it needs to be initiated. And by initiated, we mean one step beyond consent. So you need to get consent to run a state and an FBI check from folks. And in order to run those checks, you need to get consent. And so consent is when they sign off and say, yes, I can do that. When we say initiated, we mean one step beyond getting consent. Typically, that's actually running the state check. So going into a lot of you have the automated system where you can go in and just run them on the computer, or faxing in the information. Those of you who still do kind of sending those in, sending those off. So you want to make sure that you're recording that date. So the initiated date does need to be recorded. So if you are sending those off, you'll want to record the date when those checks were sent off. If you're doing them on the computer, a lot of times people just print off the check, which is great because that shows that it was initiated on that date. So just making sure that folks understand what initiated means. Again, it's one step beyond getting consent, and your policies and procedures should define how you guys look at initiate. So some folks are, when we go down, and by initiate, we mean we rolled the prints. By initiate, we mean that we send them off. We actually forward them on to the entity that they need to be going to. So everyone defines initiated. You can define that kind of what works best for your organization, but it is one step further than getting consent. To be clear, we recommend that initiate is the day that you send them off, but everyone can define that a little differently within kind of some constraints there. So FBI check. FBI check is the fingerprint check, is what I'm referring to here. So who receives the fingerprint check? Is this subject to everyone receives it, or is there a different criteria for the FBI check?
Jancy?
Yes, Sheila.
I'm sorry. Before we went any further, I wanted to clarify my earlier comment.
Yes.
And I always thought that with these background checks, whether it's the National Sex Offender and that, we needed to wait after the position was offered due to problems that could arise, that we ran something and they didn't get the opportunity to prove themselves. That that's not true. Am I just getting that all mixed up?
Nope. You are absolutely correct. So if for the NSOPW specifically, those do need to be ran prior to them starting. So typically, some folks do that prior to ever extending the offer to them, or as you said, we extend the offer and then they accept and we immediately run it. Everyone does that a little differently, as long as it's prior to them starting. And then yes, they have to have the opportunity, if there are any hits that come back, to be able to challenge those findings. There has to be an outlet for that. The state check, we say initiate on no later than the first day of work or service. However, it is a best practice to run those much earlier than that. Because if there is, again, something that comes back from that check that would exclude them from serving with your program, you want to know that. Or if there's a hit that might not be them, you want to be able to give them some time to, challenge those results. And so, yeah, it is a best practice to do that a little bit ahead of time, specifically for staff, with RSVP. But for FGP and SCP, sometimes we don't have the luxury of time to get them set up. And so they need to do those a little quicker than that. And so that's why they put that on the first day, the initiate no later than the first day of work or service for the state check. But for you, yes, that's a best practice to do those ahead of time. We don't get into accompaniment. That's the other piece of this. So if someone hasn't cleared the state check, they need to be accompanied by someone until those checks are cleared. And so if you don't want to deal with accompaniment, then you can most definitely run those checks ahead of time, make sure they clear them ahead of time, and then you never have to deal with the accompaniment factor. That's in there as well. So does that help a little bit?
Yep, yeah. I guess I just had it in my head that we needed to wait till they were hired. And now our sponsor, they do the state check. I think it's it's before the first day, orientation day,
Yep.
or it could even be that day.
Yeah.
So, but that's before they're in with us, you know. So
Yeah,
it takes a day
and the reason they probably do that prior to the kind of the first day is because it does cost money. So if they run the state check prior to them ever accepting, you never know if they're going to accept the offer or not. So a lot of times if they want them to accept, then they want them to show up. And then that's, that first day is when they can initiate that process. So hopefully that makes a little bit more. And every sponsor is a little different, but as long as they're meeting the criteria of this, that's what we look for.
Right. Yeah. I guess I'll talk with them and see what they want for that NSOPW thing.
Yeah. And the NSOPW is a free check, and so that can be done really at any time. But it is a separate check. So, yep. Yeah.
So I can go ahead and just run it.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm not.
The NSOPW, you do not need consent to run. It's a public website. The state check and the FBI checks, you do need consent to run those.
So we don't even need to tell them at all that
you need to tell them that you're doing a background check on them. Yes, you do need to tell them, but you don't need written consent to do that, to do the check itself.
Okay. All right. Well, I won't take up any more of your time. Thank you.
No, you're fine. And Sheila, and look at your policies for the NSCHC and just make sure that those also flow as well. So if you do kind of any juggling or changing with that, make sure that those written policies are also following kind of how you guys do business.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Awesome. So my question was FBI check. Who receives this check? No one responded. Anybody? Who receives the FBI check? Kaylin says same as state and NSOPW. Actually, it is not. The FBI check is only applicable if you have access to vulnerable populations. So, which is in most instances for you guys, typically, anyone who's charging time. But as Sonia says, people in contact with vulnerable populations. So yes, the NSOPW and the state check are required for anyone who charges time. The FBI check is anyone who has contact with vulnerable populations, and Sheila confirmed, yes, Sheila, on an ongoing basis. So ongoing basis, so not sporadically we have it. Typically, your fiscal people might not need an FBI check, but they'll need an NSOPW and a state check based on our criteria. Now, that might be different for your sponsor. Maybe everyone gets the FBI check. If you'll see that checklist that I referred back to, it asks, one of the questions on there is, does this person have access to vulnerable populations, yes or no? And that's where you can kind of record that, because it does need to be recorded somewhere if they have access to vulnerable populations. Reoccurring access, sorry, I will clarify, reoccurring access to vulnerable populations. And that sometimes is in the job description. You can do it on that checklist. It's just making sure that that's recorded somewhere. So the FBI check is a little different than the NSOPW and the state. Oh, Kaylin, you have to ask me, how is vulnerable populations defined? It is defined. So it's basically youth, anyone over elderly, and anyone with special needs. I can pull the language. I don't have it in front of me, but yes, we do have that defined in the regulations. I just don't have it memorized. So, but it is people with special needs, elderly, and youth, if they have access to those on a reoccurring access. And they they have some age ranges in there for those folks as well. I can pull that. I'll send that out with the follow-up to this. How vulnerable populations is defined. So, any questions about the FBI check? So when is the check initiated? Anybody know? So when is the FBI check initiated? This is the same as the state check. So it is to be initiated. Yes, this is the same as the state check, Kaylin. It is to be initiated no later than the first day of worker service. So the state and the FBI check are same in the initiation time frame. They are to be initiated no later than the start of worker service. So there is that. So Sheila says before the first day of work, before the time the grant is accrued. So yeah, basically every sponsor is going to be a little different, but yeah, before they're accruing any time on that grant, no later than their first day of worker service. It's a best practice to actually initiate it prior to their first day of worker service. But yeah, that's our definition for that one. We did talk a little bit about accompaniment when I addressed Sheila's question, but the one thing to keep in mind is if people are still pending either a state check or an FBI check, they do have to do accompaniment. So if one has cleared, accompaniment can cease, but typically the state check is the first to clear in most instances. So they don't have to do accompaniment if one of those has cleared, but the state and the FBI check, one of them has to clear before accompaniment can cease. So if you have anyone who has not cleared the state check or the FBI check prior to starting, you do have to document accompaniment. And that that checklist, I'm blaming it on Monday, and my pen just exploded all over my hands. I'm going to blame Kaylin for that one because I made a note for her. The one of those does have to clear prior to accompaniment ceasing. So I hope that makes sense. You're welcome, Kaylin. You're welcome. Oh, Kathy says there's some background noise, so I just want to make sure that folks are muting your phone lines. So if you can, please make sure that your phones are muted. Again, *6 will mute and unmute your telephone if you don't have a mute button. We want to make sure that folks can hear okay. Thank you. All right, so we are going to get into some common issues, and these are just some quick, not quick, but some common issues that we're seeing. The NSOPW not being run appropriately. So the National Sex Offender Public website, when you run that, again, it has to be run prior to them starting. So sometimes people run it on the first day of service, which is service or work. That is not correct. It actually has to be done prior to them starting. So making sure that that's run appropriately. In addition, if there are any hits on that NSOPW, those do need to be documented and make sure that you have signed off that those hits are not your individual. You've reviewed and considered the results and determined that the hits are not your person that you're talking about. The screenshots from the NSOPW do need to be printed off and kept in your files. So you want to make sure that you're keeping those. For the state checks, there is a sex offender check that's ran with those. That does not meet the requirement of the NSOPW. Folks are confusing that these days. So for Iowa, we do the state check, and the state check is called a SING check, is the common term for it. And so it does have a sex offender check rolled into it, but that does not meet the requirement of the NSOPW. So do not rely on that state check to be the NSOPW. Those are two different things. So making sure that folks are aware of that. In addition, sometimes states are down. If a state is down, you have to record that that state has cleared at another time, or that you run it again until all the states are clear. So a lot of times the state is down. So let's say you run an NSOPW for me, the state of California seems to be the most typical one, is down, and then you go back and you can print that off, and then you go back later and now California's up, but now Arizona's down, and so you print that one off, or you can just wait until all the states are reporting, which is what I do, because I have to run NSOPWs on all of our VISTA members, so I understand the frustration of the system. I just wait until they're all clear, and then you run it a couple times and it eventually comes back up, hopefully. So NSOPWs, typically the most common issues with those are they're just not run appropriately. People aren't recording stuff, states are down, they're run after the person starts. They're not run at all, and people are relying on the state check to do that. So those are some common issues that we find with the NSOPW, and those seem to be common issues across the board. And so I just want to make sure that folks are aware of that as you're looking at your NSOPW. It is really the easiest check to run, but it is really the easiest also to not run appropriately. So we want to make sure that folks are aware of that. Whoops. The next issue is we're actually finding more issues in staff files than we actually are in volunteer files. And by volunteer files, I mean our foster grandparents and our senior companions for you guys. A lot of our foster grandparents and senior companions, those files are great, but then when it comes to the staff files, things aren't appropriately documented. NSCHCs are run inappropriately because we're relying on someone from this. You're relying on someone from the sponsor to run those, and so that's why we are really highly encouraging making sure that two people understand what is required of those component checks. Because we are finding much more issues in staff files than actually in volunteer files, and so we want to make sure that folks are aware of that as you're looking at those, just making sure there's some checks and balances put into place. So those are just things I'm just highlighting a few things for you. And then the final common issue, these are just the top 3 things that I wanted to point out, is that the state or FBI was not initiated appropriately. So basically, they're ran, but they weren't ran on the first day. They were ran like they started on a Monday. We initiate them on that the following Friday, or they started Monday and we didn't start them until we didn't actually run those until later. So we want to make sure that folks understand that initiation process for the state and FBI checks do need to be recorded. So you need to record when those are initiated and making sure that those are initiated appropriately. So no later than the first day of work or service. So making sure that folks are getting those done on that first day, because it's one of those things that can be easily overlooked. And so we want to make sure that folks are aware that that is one of the common issues that we're seeing. So any questions as we kind of move through this? We're kind of getting to the end of my session. But I just wanted to make sure that folks had any question. So Kathy is typing in a question. She says, for all unpaid, non-stipended volunteers are not required to have an NSOPW. So Kathy, if they are non-paid, non-stipended volunteers, so like an RSVP volunteer, they are not required to have an NSOPW. However, it is a best practice. So we have a lot of programs who do run the NSOPW on their RSVP volunteers because it is a free and simple check, but it is not a requirement of the program unless your sponsor requires that. So there are some programs, there are some RSVP programs whose sponsors have set a requirement for their program, specifically for their unpaid, non-stipended volunteers for RSVP, that they do have to go through a check. And so if your sponsor is requiring that, you most certainly have to meet that requirement. But for the NSCHC, or the National Service Criminal History Check, that is not a requirement. Sorry, I'm getting tongue twisted here all of a sudden. Yes, definitely better safe than sorry for something that simple. Absolutely. Any other questions from folks about NSCHC? Again, this is I didn't mean to overwhelm you, but I just wanted to make sure, and this is pretty basic stuff. And I wanted to make sure that folks are keeping this top of mind. It's very easy that this is one of those things, especially if you don't deal with it every day, that you kind of just keep in the back of your head and you're like, oh, I'll deal with that someday. And then you hire a new staff person and they're on 3 weeks and you're like, oh, we never initiated those checks. So making sure that folks are aware of that. In addition, if you do an assessment of your background checks and you find an issue, please let us know. It is better to self-disclose than it is to wait for us to find it during a compliance monitoring. It's still a disallowance of cost if you do self-disclose, but it does reduce the amount of the disallowance. So we just want to make sure that folks are aware of that. If you do an assessment or a review of your checks, and you do find something, don't try to hide it and just hope that we never see it. It's better to let us know, and so we can deal with it at that point. So just wanted to make sure that folks are aware of that as well. Any other questions? I'll stop rambling for a little bit. So hopefully this is as clear as mud to everyone. I know it's a Monday and it's the afternoon and this is such an exciting topic, but I will say that it is something that I want to make sure that folks are paying attention to. So the PowerPoint will be sent out, as I said, afterwards. I will send out the definition of vulnerable populations, though I don't have it memorized. I probably should. I will get that out to you guys as well as the recording of this session will be sent out to everyone. So I just wanted to make sure that folks are aware of that. The resource that is the most important to you guys is that the nationalservice.gov criminal history check webpage that we kind of went over. They've tried really hard to make it more user-friendly, and I think they have done that. But there are some updates that come, and I just want to make sure that folks are aware of that stuff that's out there. Our next CSO chat or state office chat will be September 11th, and we'll be talking about financial management, kind of going back to the basics for financial management. If you guys have not heard, we did get a new grants officer, so Jeff Montgomery is no longer our grants officer. Our grants officer is Lynette White. Out of our Philadelphia office at the FFMC. In addition, we have requested some training topics on financial management, hopefully at the Nonprofit Summit in October. However, we're not sure if that's going to come to fruition or not, but I just wanted to let you guys know that we are trying to do some trainings. We're trying to get the ball rolling on a few things for that. But financial management, September 11th, we'll try to do some again, it's only an hour session, so there's only so much that you can do via a webinar, but we wanted to make sure that we are bringing this up to folks. So this will be our last CSO chat for the year, and we will do an assessment if this is something that you guys have found beneficial. We've been doing them every other month. If this is something that you guys find beneficial, if it's something that we should cut back to, quarterly, if it's something that you're like, Jancy, this is a waste of our time. Because if it's a waste of your time, then it's a waste of my time. So we will be asking for some feedback on these coming up as we move into the FY18 fiscal year. So we just wanted to make sure that folks are aware of that. We will be trying to plan ahead. But the next one is September 11th, and it's going to be on financial management. So additional information for our office, as always, is the ia@cns.gov. You will know our new our new phone number. So that is up. The Managing Senior Corps Program website at nationalservice.gov is a great resource for you as well for more information about your programs. And then the Senior Corps training calendar. I know Brian Cognito does a Tuesday talk with you guys from headquarters, and so that's a monthly Tuesday talk. So this is an addition to those, and so those are all listed at the training calendar. In my world, that training calendar is a little backwards. It goes like the oldest first, and then you got to scroll down to the most recent stuff. So just keep that in mind when you look at it. But it is a great resource. If you've been able to join those Tuesday talks, I encourage you to continue that. They're a nice resource. So any questions folks have before we're getting close to the top of the hour, so I wanted to be mindful of folks' times. But any other questions folks have about NSCHC or really anything at all? You have like 5 minutes. All right. I'm going to